Mesquite Citizen Journal once again is delighted to sit down with Morris Workman, the newest book author in Mesquite. And we are celebrating the publication and distribution, because I got my copy in the mail yesterday.
Good.
Of his newest book. Here, hold that up.
Thank you. Let me give you my best Vanna White. Yep, that's it.
So that's just an awesome thing for a first-time author to have his first book published within, what, 6 months it's been you were working on it?
Yeah, that's one of the things that surprised me, because I was anticipating, after talking with a lot of writers and reading a lot on it, I expected the process to be a lot more extensive than it was in this instance. I think a lot of it, I just got really lucky with the publisher I wound up with.
And that's Sunbury Press?
Sunbury Press out of Pennsylvania. Because there are some that are not, and that's one of the funny things. When I sent out to 15 publishers, and out of 15 publishers I got 2 rejections, and I expected more, especially for a first-time author. It's just the nature of the beast.
Right.
So I clearly only got 2. The part that has surprised me is in the last month. Now, I sent out to most of these publishers in September, October, and November. I got signed. Signed to a contract in December by Sunbury. But the part that's funny is in the last month I've gotten 2 more responses from some of the publishers that I sent to, saying we found your submission. We would like to see the rest of the book and maybe offer you a contract. And it's like, yeah, this thing's already on shelves, so thank you just the same.
Also, you're giving the publishers the rejection slips instead of the other way around.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, I guess that's kind of how it's turning out. But it's been a really interesting process. From the very beginning, one of the things that really surprised me about this, you see a lot of horror movies, and I've always thought there are a lot of horror books out there because you've got Stephen King and you've got Dean Koontz and you've got a lot of very successful horror writers. And so I thought there was a broad market for it. When you're writing, one of the things when it comes time to sell your work, a lot of writers will use what's called the writer's market, and it's this thick book that has a listing of all the publishers in the country, of books, magazines, and different kinds of publications. And this thing's like 800 pages. And so I went through it, and I thought I'd get lots and lots of places to send my work. And I started going through it, and I kept finding out, because in the listings in that book, it lists who to send it to, the name of the editor, the address, how they want it, how many words they're looking for, what they pay per word or what they pay per piece. And one of the things is it lists what they're looking for. And I found out there are just not many publishers looking for horror. And that really surprised me, because I expected to have 50 or 60 to choose from. And when I got finished, there were only about 15 to 20 that would accept horror.
Oh, gosh.
And so that was the first real eye-opener in this process. Once I got down to that 15, then started sending out, and some of them, and it's very much like the newspaper business. You've got a real contingent of very old school publishers. They want it done the old school. They don't want to hear email. Mail it to us. Put it in the big brown envelope, and with the self-addressed stamped envelope, which that's the way it's been done for decades. I thought we'd progress beyond that, but a lot of them, they still want the old-fashioned way. Send us the query, send us the first 5 chapters, and do it all by mail. And so that was a little bit surprising. But some of the ones that I actually dealt with that were online, that were much faster. And Sunbury was one. They were extremely fast. They're very progressive as far as their ability to use technology to get the work done.
Oh, good.
And they were Johnny on the spot when, like I said, we signed the contract in the end of December, and I was assigned and working with an editor by late February, and so from that point forward, we had by the middle of March, we were done with the editing process, which was another thing. I expected to be a lot longer period, but the editor I work with, she was just terrific. She she got the stuff and she would look at it, and we'd do it in pieces, and she'd send me back, the corrections and her suggestions, and that was another part that was surprising. Everything I've heard from writers is it's an arduous process, and it's really ego bashing, and by the time you're done, I can't do anything right. And the editor I worked with, she was really smooth, and I just really liked working with her. And
Good.
She got stuff done in a hurry. So we were done with the editing process by mid-March, and then we got into working with what's the cover going to look like, and what's the artwork going to look like. So we were ready by early April. And actually, they had the book out by the second week of April. So.
Well, I know I ordered it off of Amazon last week. We're soon going to have it available through the Mesquite Citizen Journal online bookstore.
Yes, thank you very much.
We'll include it with the rest of our local authors.
And I'm in some just amazing company there. I mean, Mike McGreer and Betty Haynes and Terry Donnelly, and you've got some impressive names that I'm joining in there. So thank you.
Yeah, well, we add to that lineup whenever we can, and there's a lot of people here in Mesquite, surprisingly and not so surprisingly, who are well-known authors.
Yeah.
So you're going to be joining that.
Thank you.
Talk about the book itself, and by the way, give me my copy back. Talk about the book itself. I have had a lot of people ask me what the genre is. When did you actually start writing the book? What time frame did you put the first word on paper?
The first word on paper was probably 4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. It's been a project in the works for a very long time. I'd write for a little while, and I'd get real enthused about it, and then real life kept intruding, and newspaper work, and that's what paid the bills, and so there were. It's been a lot of time.
Wait, let me stop you there. The newspaper business paid the bills? That part you never taught me. Okay, go ahead.
But it was a project that I started a good while back, and I'd hack at it for a little while, and then put it away for a little while. The part where it really kicked in is when I finished at Mesquite Local News. My wife and I sat down and we made the decision together that we were going to spend the next 6 months finishing the book and pushing the book, and that's what because it's what I originally got into the newspaper business for in the first place. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I've known that since like I was 9 years old. I knew I wanted to be a writer. When I finished high school and all that, real life gets in the way, mortgages and car payments and stuff like that. I grew up in a very blue collar family. My dad was like, go to work driving a cement truck. That's what real men do. And so I've had to take real jobs to keep the family going. But it was always in my head that's what I wanted to do. And so when I got the very first opportunity to write in public, which was writing a monthly column for the Spectrum, that was a lot of why I did it. I still remember when I was in high school, the arrogance and hubris of youth. But I remember being in high school, and one of the salespeople is basically what they are, but it was one of the recruiters from George Washington University came to our high school, and she was talking to me about because I had gained a reputation in school about writing, and I'd won some awards while I was still in school, and she was going on about, they got this wonderful journalism program. And I remember telling her, because I'm 17 and I'm stupid and I'm arrogant, and it's like, newspaper, I don't want to be in the newspaper business. I don't want to be a newspaper writer. I want to be able to use my imagination, my creativity. That's what I don't want to be that would be boring. But as I got older, and I don't know that I got any wiser, but as I got older, I came to realize that writing is writing, and I saw writing columns as an opportunity to be the springboard to get to where I really wanted to be, which is writing novels. And so when I first started writing a column for the Spectrum, that was what was in my head, is that's where I want to go. So I started with that, and then when the opportunity came up to come to Mesquite and work for the DVT as a sports writer, that was the next step in the evolution.
Yeah.
But it was always part of my plan. These are the steps I have to take to get me to a place of legitimacy to where when it's time to really write the novel and try to get it published, that's how I'm going to get there. Because, and I've said it many times before, you know, when you send in and submit a manuscript, the people who are looking at the manuscript, you have to include your bio and stuff. And you know, when you're sending a manuscript that says, "Hi, here's my horror novel from Morris, the insurance agent." Well, here's my novel from Morris, the construction worker. That's not going to get a lot of play. But coming from a newspaper person or from a newspaper editor, that gave me the CVs and the credentials to say, okay, they're going to take a look at it.
Yeah.
And so that was really how I got in the newspaper business in the first place. And then when I really got into the newspaper business, when we started Mesquite Local News, that's when I found out, I really enjoyed it. And so when I ended with Mesquite Local News in June of last year, my wife and I sat down and said, we're going to take 6 months and we're going to really do this. And so she supported me and said, go forward. And anybody out there who wants to be a writer, if you don't have somebody like this in your life, it's a very hard job. And my wife has made this very easy for me because she's very supportive. And so
that's good. I
was able to write and just write. And so from June until September, that's what I did 5 days a week, just wrote. That's all I did. I did a little bit of stuff for my computer business, but mostly I wrote just about every day. And so by the time I got finished, the novel was finished. And most of the important plot points came during that 6 month period. I introduced a whole new arc and some new characters that weren't there in the original, and so that was the period where I really wrote the novel. Even though I've been hacking on it for 4 or 5 years, the last 6 months that's where I really wrote that novel.
Yeah. So without giving away the plot. Talk a little bit about the book, its setting. I just got it in the mail yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to read much of it. But talk a little bit about the content of the book, the characters, maybe some of the characters.
A lot of times when I write, I always start with what if, and that's where this book started. What if? What if you hear about all these snowstorms and the blizzards and people get killed in the storms and houses get destroyed. What if it's not really the storm? What if it's something that comes with the storm? And that's where the genesis started. I started playing that out and where it came from and where it wound up. And that's what the story is about. The first chapter is actually based on a true historical event. And I'll give you an example. When you think about natural disasters and death tolls and things like that, usually when you're thinking of stuff like that, you're thinking tornadoes, hurricanes is the big one. And so before Katrina, the biggest hurricane that we'd seen, in my lifetime was Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah.
In Hurricane Andrew, there were 65 people who lost their lives. In the 1988 schoolhouse blizzard, they lost 245 people. And so
1988.
Excuse me, 1888.
1888.
And when you think about natural disasters and how they impact people, somehow snowstorm doesn't really come up on the radar screen. You're thinking hurricanes and tornadoes. And then I started doing a little research, and the same year in 1888 they had the Great Blizzard, and 400 people died in the Great Blizzard of 1888. Started looking forward to modern times. The 1940 Armistice Day blizzard, that was 154 people who died. And so there were these blizzards that we've had. 1978, the Great Blizzard of 1978, there were 146 people who died in that. So there are snowstorms and blizzards that have happened where a lot of people have died. And the premise of the story is sometimes it's not the snow that does it. It's a spirit that comes with the snow. And in doing some of the research for the book, there are things that we think we're so arrogant in our modern day. We think science has all the answers. And you start looking into, there are things that science still can't figure out about how rain and snow work. They have some ideas and they make some really good guesses. But basically, where does lightning come from? Where does thunder come from? Well, static electricity, and it's the movement of the moisture. And one of the things that I found fascinating is there are so many forms of energy that we can't see. We can measure them, but we can't see them. Wind is probably one of my favorites. I can see the tree move, but I can't see the wind that made the tree move. And there are all kinds of energy in the world, and some of the energy that perhaps we've not even discovered yet. Some of it may be malevolent energy. You talk about ghosts. Ghosts would be another energy form. And that's what the book goes into, is there's an energy form that comes with the storm. And it's not a very nice energy form. And then when I started doing research, especially in the Native American culture, there are a number of gods and spirits that they refer to for some of these storms and some of the death that occurs with the storms. And one of my favorites that I read about was the Soyams Dam. And the Soyams Dam is a lot of what's in the book. And it's a spirit that, it's an unhappy spirit. It's unhappy. It's angry, and it takes out its rage on humans and whatever it encounters. And so throughout the book, when somebody gets caught in a storm, it's a Soyams Dam that's taking their life or destroying what someone values, and it all comes from the rage. And so that's where the book starts. And then the main characters is an insurance agent who's got this quirky thing where he makes lists in his head, and that's kind of how he functions through life. And he's going through a bad patch, and he's going through a divorce, and he meets this one-legged woman, and she's my favorite character in the book, Sylvia. And she's got such energy, and she's a driving force, even though she's not a primary character. She's my favorite character because she's got a lot of sass, and she's very strong-willed, and it explores another part of that issue of energy, and that is love energy. The power of love. We talk about the power of love, and there's songs about it.
Yeah.
The book examines perhaps the power of love to reach beyond the veil, to reach those who have passed to the other side. And if that power exists, because Einstein said that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it only changes forms. If that's true, there's an awful lot of life energy that has passed through this world. If there was a way to bring it back, maybe there's another energy form that can do that. And I think love is another energy that that can be, it can't even be measured, but it can't be denied. And that's some of the elements. But the core story is the beast or the spirit that's going through and comes with the most powerful snowstorms and the destruction and the death that it causes.
So you had this in your head the whole time I worked for you? That's a little frightening. Well,
again, the parts that, and it's called a horror book. It's in the horror genre, but it's not. I picked that genre because it's the only one that almost fits, because I've got a spirit and I've got basically a monster. But it's not it's not your traditional gory we're going to rip people's heads off and stuff like that. Although I did get one of my proofers. She had a real issue, and I mean with great umbrage was very unhappy when a dog got killed. And it just goes to show how funny it is. People would read the book and all the humans that get killed, she didn't have a problem with that. But I let a dog get killed, and the world came undone. So
yeah, I can go with that one.
Exactly. So
I can appreciate that.
That was the closest to being a gory moment, and it wasn't really all that gory by today's standards.
Yeah.
But that's why it's listed as a horror, because I've had people say, "Oh, I don't read horror," and it's like, it's a story. So.
Okay. Well, I was reading the acknowledgments at the front, and couldn't help but notice a few names of local residents that you give a lot of credit to. In addition to your family and your mother and your wife, daughter, you pay tribute to Cindy Delaney, who was your business partner at Mesquite Local News. A couple others, Carm Paquette, I believe she worked for you also at Mesquite Local. Bob Everett. Some people will still know him.
You bet.
Joe Bowler.
Yes.
And Tom Reisinger. Betty Haynes, Terry Donnelly, Michael McGreer,
Yeah.
J.L. Myers, who convinced me that writers from little old Mesquite can get published.
Absolutely.
And Susan Bennett.
Oh my gosh, yes. Susan Bennett, she's an inspiration just for me to take air in and out of my lungs. She's one of the most amazing, inspirational people that I know. And she inspires me just to keep, no matter what I'm doing, she inspires, whether it's, she's always on me about, you should be playing music more, you should be singing more, you've got gifts and talents that you shouldn't let waste away. And this is one of them. And I was double blessed because she's so inspirational to make me want to keep doing better. But she is also, she's a journalism teacher and she's an English teacher. And so she was one of my proofers, and she went through and she read the story and she gave me her critiques and what she thought of the story. She also had an eye for any errors, spelling and grammatical errors. And so she was a true blessing and a gift because she kept me going, and she helped evaluate the final product. But there are a lot of people that I mentioned in the
Don Muse, who continues to encourage me not to waste my talent by sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah. And that's the thing that and Don's the same way. He's constant. He sends me emails. A lot of people after I left the newspaper business, people who were constantly talking to me, evaporated. Now that I wasn't important anymore, they didn't have time for me. Don's one of those people. He continued to stay in my ear about a lot of topical things, about some political things, about things that are involved in the community. And Don and I don't always agree on things. He can be very he can be almost as opinionated as I can. But he is.
I'd like to see that conversation.
And they always are fun conversations. But he's constantly keeping me in the loop and trying to get me involved. And especially during this period, I've been intentionally not involved, so I can focus on this and focus on some other things. Sort of have that palate cleanser to get the newsman thing out of my head so I can move on to other things in my life. But there are so many people that I mentioned in the acknowledgments because there's something that, a truth that I learned, and that is, and I've heard this from other writers as well now that I've finished the process. When you write a book, at the end of it, it's got the title and it's got your name on the cover. And that is such a lie, because whoever wrote the words, one person may have actually gone through the motions, but there are so many people who have contributed to making that writer or making that story. And when I started thinking about it, I started the acknowledgments with, I want to thank the people who were involved in the process. I want to thank people like Susan Bennett and my sister and some other people who did the proofing, and because that's part of the process, that's part of the actual novel. Dr. Larry Kane in St. George, he shared with me some insights in the process of how the human body freezes. So and my mom, who was an emergency room nurse, she gave me some real insight into that. So those are people who had something to do with the mechanics of the book. But then when I started thinking about it, there are some people who helped develop and make the writer, me. And I had to acknowledge those people, because without their influence, I'm not the person that I am. I don't have the experiences that I have. I don't have the confidence to do, and this can be a very lonely process. Without their support, without their encouragements, I could not have accomplished this. And I think it's so unfair that many people had an influence and they don't get their name on the cover of the book. And so I just thought it was real important. And and I felt bad for the publisher, because when an acknowledgment is usually a page, and mine was 4 pages long. But there were so many people that I want to mention. And then of course, the minute I send it to the publisher, I think, oh, I forgot to mention that person. And there were several people that I didn't mention, and I apologize to you. You really are important to me. I just didn't think of it at that time. But again, the acknowledgement, and most people don't read the acknowledgements in a book. I hope people will at least take a minute, especially the folks in Mesquite. I hope they'll take a minute to read, because there are some important names in there, including yours. And I thank you for all of your influences and the fact that you've continued to to make an old guy feel like he's still sort of relevant. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So where are you going to go from here? You mentioned the other day doing some book signings or those kinds of things, and celebrating the publication of your first book. I got to tell you, from writing books in the past of my own, textbooks, which people had to buy, they never had a choice. But I got to tell you that there is nothing like holding that book the first time in your hands, and seeing your name on the front cover. It's just, for people who don't write, they just can't imagine the feeling that comes over you with that single brief moment in time.
Absolutely. For me, it made it real, because up until the moment I had it in my hands, it's always in the back of my head, and it's because I know how my luck works. I kept waiting for the call, from the publisher saying, "Oh, we've decided not to go forward with the project," or "We've had a glitch," or the lawyers say we can't do something, and I kept waiting for, I like to say, my luck, the publisher would go out of business. I kept waiting for something to happen where it would stop this process. Until I got it in my hands, I always felt like, it's not real. Something's going to happen, or it's not
a snowstorm was going to hit the
you just don't know. And
the publisher's building or something.
The first big charge that I got was when my sister called and said, "Hey, do you know that your book's on Amazon?" We hadn't even finished the process yet, and they had already put it on Amazon, and so that was really exciting because that made it very real. But even with that, I figured, they could still pull the plug on this. But when I got the copy in my hands and when I saw my name on the cover, that made it very real, and it made all the work really worthwhile. And unfortunately, what they don't tell you when you're a writer is, once you finish writing the book and go through this arduous process of having it published, that's only the first half of the job, because there's another whole half that goes with this. And that's the thing that's so difficult about being a writer, is so much of your work has nothing to do with writing.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, because the writing is the part that most writers, it's what they live for. Mm-hmm. I love writing. I mean, I don't necessarily like the chore of sitting down and I got to get my head working, and that can be a task unto itself. But that's the part we get into this because that's what we love to do.
Right.
But there's all these other things you have to do that have nothing to do with writing and everything to do with being a writer. And that is what we're getting ready to embark on now. And that is the marketing side. And so it begins with doing book signings. And I'm real excited about some of this, first off, because it's a chance for me to interact with people who care enough to buy my book. And a lot of it at this point, I recognize, isn't about the story. It's not about the book. It's about me. They either know me, or they've always been so good to me, so encouraging, and I'm so grateful to those folks. And those are the people who I was blown away, because I got news from my publisher on, I guess it was on Tuesday, that the book actually, it was released midway through April, and it was #1 on the Sunbury's bestseller list. For a first-time author, that is a huge charge any day. But to do it in the first month that the book was released, and again, I mean, the Sunbury bestseller list, that's the publisher's bestseller list.
Right.
That's not the New York Times bestseller list, so my head hasn't gone that far gone. So it's a much smaller universe. But to be atop the bestsellers list for Sunbury Press is more a testament. It's not a testament to me as much as it is the people who know me and have been so supportive, because a lot of people that I know and quite a few that I don't know, when they heard that I wrote a book, they went and bought their book. They went and did the pre-order with the publisher, or they bought on Amazon.
Well, I can only imagine that some of them wanted to see if they were in it as a victim.
I guess that is a concern I hadn't thought about, but that was I was so blown away by the fact that people cared
You
enough
bet.
to do that, because
Yeah.
you know, it's putting your money where your mouth is. I mean, they paid to buy the book, and that's what made it #1 on the bestseller list. And so that came from people who know me. That came from friends and folks that I've met
Yeah.
over the years. And you know, I'm sure I may never know where they came from, but I'm sure a lot of those sales came from Mesquite, and I'm very grateful for that.
So when does the second book come out?
Well, that's the thing. Right now we start the part that is so much not about writing, which is the book signing. And because a lot of the story is set in Pennsylvania, this summer I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to make a swing through Pennsylvania and Maryland and Delaware to set up book signings and go and you know, and that's a process that I don't have a clue how it works, and so that's a whole new challenge. But it'll be an adventure because I'll get to go places and meet new people, and that'll be fun. Before we get to that point, we'll be doing some book signings here, and I don't have any of them arranged yet. Apparently, there's a big book fair that they do at Tuacahn in May, and so I'm already been signed up to do one of those. So I'll be there to do that book signing. But that's what it is. From here on, it's the marketing. It's doing stuff on the internet and going to book signings and talking
doing
to
interviews with local newspapers.
That's right. And fortunately, again, I've got a team put together. You know, my wife is a huge part of that. You know, where she will be doing a lot of the lead-in work on this stuff, and so that's another fun part, is now my wife and I get to work on a project together. But that's what we're doing for the next 6 months, will be the marketing stuff, and we've got to really ramp it up because the story is set around Thanksgiving. And so I want to make sure all the things are in place and all the marketing's been done, so we can get most of the sales mileage in before Thanksgiving, because I think it'll have an impact. And Thanksgiving does have a piece of this book. There's a meaning there. And so that's what we're doing for the next little bit. In the interim, I've got 2 stories that I've actually got just a ton of stories. My problem isn't coming up with books, and I've heard writers like, I don't know what to write about now. I never have that problem. I always have a long list of stories I really want to write, and never have the time to do them all. But I've got 2 stories that I'm working on that are actually, one of them is about a third done, the other one is outlined and blocked, and is probably going to be, it's probably about 5-6 chapters deep already. And that was some of what I've learned from the process. Is one is a horror story, the one that's actually a third of the way through. It's another horror story, and the thing I like about it, it's a story about the USS Arizona, and when she went down in 1941. And if you've ever been to the Arizona,
see, you only picked that subject so you would have to go research it in Hawaii.
Well, that's where I messed up, because I've already done that research, and so now I can't use that as a tax write-off. But one of the things, and it's funny that you bring that up, it was my trip to Hawaii that inspired it, because I went to the USS Arizona, and it is one of the most emotional things I've ever done. I mean, and it will take your breath away. But one of the things that got me going is when you look down into the wreckage of the Arizona from the memorial, there are still bubbles of oil that rise to the surface. You know, 60, 70 years later, oil is still leaking from that ship. And, you know, some different people call it, you know, it's the Arizona's tears. Well, what my next horror story is about is one of those bubbles comes up, and contained in that bubble of oil is actually the spirit of one of the sailors who died. And that spirit takes over the body of a student, you know, a college student who was there, who was actually come to kill himself. And so the spirit takes over his body, and the first thing that he encounters is rage, because that sailor who went down in the Arizona looks around, and he was killed by the Japanese. So obviously he's got a real anger there. And then he sees, well, you know, Japanese cars everywhere he turns, and the Japanese economy is so much better than the American economy, and he sees all these things of Japanese influence that he is offended and he's angry. And then the story starts to unfold from there. But that's the horror story, and then I've got a murder mystery. And the reason that I'm pursuing the murder mystery is what I learned during this process, which is murder mysteries. There's a much wider, a much wider demand for it. There are a lot more publishers who are looking at it, and from people that I've talked to. Now, it's funny. I was at the bank yesterday and talking with a nice lady there, and somebody had congratulated me on making the bestsellers list, and she, oh, you're a writer, and then she asked me what the book was about, and I explained it. And I say, well, it's a horror book. And right away it's like, oh, well, I don't read horror. And I've gotten that so many times. Oh, I don't, just out of it, boom, I don't read horror. And so it has made me realize that may be a much narrower market, even though Stephen King seems to make a fortune at it.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a much narrower market than I realized. And so the next story that I think I'm actually going to try to have ready for release by the end of the year it's a murder mystery, and I'm pretty pleased with the direction that it's taking. There'll be a lot more character development in that one.
Okay. Well, Morris, we really appreciate you being with us today, and it's so good to see you again. And again, congratulations. You'll let us know when you do have book signings so that
Absolutely.
we can advise our readers.
And so I can thank everybody too. So thank them for buying the book, and thank them for making it on the bestseller list. So I want to thank those people. And unfortunately I'm a writer, which means I'm broke, so all I can afford to do is just write my name. But I'll do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and
Thank
we
you, Laura.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.